Hi everyone, Sue from IC Sugar. I made a Sky Paw Patrol cake a few months ago, and since that time I've had a few requests to recreate that as a tutorial. I have some time at the moment, so I've decided this week to put a tutorial together for everyone. This cake is slightly different to the last one. In the original cake, I created the character using modelling chocolate moulded directly to the fascia of the cake. This time around, I've created a separate figurine, and the reason I've done that is so for those who are perhaps not as competent or as comfortable creating your own figurine, you can buy a toy, so it probably makes the cake a little bit easier to create. I hope everyone enjoys it, and if there's any questions, I would be really happy to help and respond, so feel free to send me a message and I'll come back to you. Thank you.
So we're going to start by icing our board. As you can see, I rolled out my icing pretty thinly, and the reason I have done that is for drying time. So if you ice any board, you probably do need to let it sit for a day or two to dry. And the thinner the icing, obviously, the quicker it will dry for you. So um, I've just used a little bit of water to stick the icing to the board and smoothing it off here. Um, you'll see in a minute that I'm using a cobblestone imprint, and I sort of really like that because cobblestone creates a really nice foundation for any cakes that you're making that is sort of like structural, like houses, or like in this case a kennel. And it's really, really cool because it sort of allows you to get some really, really interesting effects, which we'll see later on when we paint it. So just so in a minute I'll take off the excess icing, and then I just simply put this aside for the night and move on to baking my cake. Um, because this is really only a demonstration cake, like I haven't made this for anyone other than this tutorial. You'll see that when I've made the cake, I haven't bothered to fill it with layers of ganache. And normally, if this was a cake for a customer, I would do that. So I would layer it and fill it with ganache, so it's a little bit more moist in the middle. But for the purpose of this video, I really just wanted to show you how I create this kennel. And at the point that we're at now, it's probably, if I was to sort of fill it, I would probably, you can see here, I'm cutting off the top of the cake. I would normally now perhaps layer it. And so you, so Yeah, so I would layer it at this point, and then stack it all together and then ice over it. But look, to be honest, I really just didn't have the time to do it. Not for a demo cake. What I'm doing here is I'm measuring the overall size, and you would have seen just a few minutes ago that I actually did put up the dimensions of this for you. Probably need to consider that if you are layering your cake, then certainly you don't need as much cake. So just something to keep in mind. But I've baked this one to the full height of the cake pans just for to make it a little bit easier for me. And as you can see that I line all of my cake tins above the actual side of the tin, and I do that A, to stop spillage, and B, when I do go and cut the cake, I can use the cake as a leveler. So it gives me a really, really um, flat surface, I suppose. So um, if if you're at this point, and you can see that I have used chocolate ganache to combine these two cakes together. I think what you might find is that if you were going to layer your cake, you probably might not have needed to have baked that second small cake. Now, unfortunately, here I realized that I thought I was recording and I actually wasn't. Um, so we've sort of missed the whole part where I've actually sliced off the top of the cake. But look, a little bit of common sense here. You just start at the middle of that top part and you slice down on an angle. Uh, and obviously just measuring it, I think from memory, it's around 11 centimeters from the base to the bottom of where that roof line is. But I did have the dimensions up earlier. What I'm doing now is I'm just taking out the front part of the cake, which is where I'm going to have the doorway. Um, when I made this cake originally, it was a Sky Paw Patrol, and I actually molded the cake, the figurine to the front of the cake, so I didn't take any cake out like I'm doing here. But the really cool thing about this is you can go and buy yourself a toy, or you can make a smaller figurine, or whatever you feel you're comfortable with doing, and you would just simply customize that front size to suit the figurine that you're putting in there. So if like the one that I recommend is between 11 or 12 to 13 centimeters in high, but but if you have a figurine that's 10 centimeters, we just cut your door a little bit smaller. So it's pretty fun, and yeah, you can customize it just to suit. So now what we're doing here is I've put chocolate ganache on, and I'm just going to cover the entire cake in chocolate ganache. So my recipe for chocolate ganache is, well, look, I'm I guess the funny thing is I don't really measure up anything, so it just comes from years of experience. But typically I use Nestle dark Jamaica, but if you're going to the supermarket, just use the Nestle dark chocolate melts. And I usually put in about a third cream in comparison to the amount of chocolate. But typically, when you mix it through, it should look reasonably glossy. If it's actually still quite lumpy, then you haven't quite put in enough cream. So, with smoothing the chocolate ganache down, I haven't shown you everything. It's just really a case of going over it with your ruler or your smoother and getting it nice and smooth to suit. As you saw there before, I had my figurine, which is made out of modeling chocolate, and I use that to give me the size of my door height. Okay, so we've transferred the cake over to the board, which you saw a moment ago. The chocolate ganache is actually set now. So this is sat coated in chocolate ganache like this for a night. So when I lifted it just before, you could see it was quite easy, and I'm not going to get chocolate ganache all over my hands. You could put it in the fridge if you're in a hurry. Ganache will set reasonably quickly. So if you're in a real hurry, you can do it sort of pretty much straight away, and just leave it sit for a little bit in the fridge. Um, so now I'm using a little bit of water, um, just to stick my black fondant to the doorway. I had some paper towel there, so I'm not dripping water all over my ice board. Um, yeah, so with the black fondant, I'm a little bit lazy and I buy it pre-mixed. Many years and years ago, I used to actually color all of my fondant, and I'd walk away with black hands or like literally black everywhere. So, which was really, really annoying. So these days, I really can't be bothered. So I actually just go and buy it. Um, Alternatively, you could have iced it in white and painted it black, but look, whatever suits. It really doesn't matter. I have a little tool here that allows me to measure the size of the boards I want to use. So this is really, really not too hard. It's just a case of rolling out your fondant so it's reasonably even and not heaps of lumps and bumps. And then just use your little tool to get the size panels that you're wanting here. You could alternatively, I mean, I've done it separately here, like done the panels separately, but you could possibly, as you'll see later on, just put a whole sheet of fondant on instead of the individual panels, and just use your ruler, as you'll see shortly, which is what I do at the back and front of the cake. And that can make it easier, and sort of probably save you cutting it out like I've done here. So I guess what happened is I put this on and went, "Oh, okay, this is all right," but but it was seeming to take an awful long time to do this. Um, so anyway, you'll see in a minute. Okay, so I've done both sides, and just you don't when you put your roof on, you don't want anything poking up. So just squishing it into the cake a little bit. All right. Now this is I'm doing the back here, and I'm sitting here thinking that it took me way too long to make all these panels, and that was really, really ridiculous. Um, so I've rolled out a whole sheet of fondant here. I've put a slight timber imprint in it, and as you can see, I'm getting a little bit, well, not necessarily lazier, but I'm sitting here just figuring that before it was just too time consuming. So anyway, so just put your fondant on. Again, I've used just a little bit of water, and we're just taking off the excess and just using the side of the cake as a guide to cut it. Um, yep, so just taking off the excess across the top there. It's not really too complicated. A larger knife is obviously better than a smaller knife because you can get you get a smoother edge. Now you'll see in a minute. So here we go. Um, I'm just measuring the sides there, and now I'm just going to use my ruler to create the indentation. So just marking it off to make sure that I've got everything even, and just pushing the ruler in instead of making all the separate panels that I did earlier. So in hindsight, this would have been a much easier way to do the sides as well. But hey, these things happen. So you go along and you make it, you go, oh gosh, that I could have certainly done that a little bit easier or a little bit better. Also at this time, um, I had already started modeling all the little bits and pieces for this cake, which everything I made for it was done out of modeling chocolate. Um, and I had most of it sort of sitting there to dry. As you saw, the dog was partly done earlier. So here we go. Again, we're pretty much just going to do exactly the same thing to the front of the cake as we did to the back. Um, and I think the really important thing is with this, just to make sure everything is pretty square. I remember with the first Paw Patrol cake that I actually did, I didn't have the roof high enough, and I didn't quite have the look that I wanted. So I ended up actually having to pull the roof off and putting some more uh, cake underneath so I could actually get the height, which was, it's like anything when you make a cake, you're not always going to get it right the first time around. So now I just simply use cake. Just baking that little bit of extra cake just to get that height for the roof. It was well worth the effort. Um, so here we're just taking off the excess fondant and remembering that we have black fondant under here already. What you didn't see there is the fact that I did actually smooth the icing around the front, so it does look like like the door looks like a nice curve. Okay, so I've put windows in this cake, and I have a set of square um, cutters that I've used just to take out the icing for the window. So rather than actually filling the these holes in with any other black fondant, I've just simply got a bit of black food color, and I've just painted over the ganache that's underneath. So the cutter that you actually used to cut out the side window, you need to use exactly the same cutter for the infill, and then a much smaller cutter to take out the corners. And you'll find then that this will fit really, really nicely into the hole that you've just created. Later on, you'll see that I do use exactly the same cutter to go around and create the window frame. Okay, so we're doing the trims. Um, Again, so we've got a consistent size trim. I've used a cutter tool that I have. And this is pretty self-explanatory, just making sure everything's square. So I haven't necessarily showed you. So obviously, with this cake, you've got two windows. So I'm not going to show you both windows. I'm pretty much just showing you one side, so at least you can get an understanding of how it's put together. So same thing here. Um, just make sure that the top, that your excess is pressed into the roof line. Um, You'll see later on that I have actually used a cardboard. So when I went and bought the board and the equipment for these, I bought a cardboard cake board and have cut that for the roof. Okay, so here we're just doing the window frame, which is pretty self-explanatory, and just getting it square. So it's not really too tricky. Okay, so I've started painting it. There's heaps and heaps of ways that you can actually color this red. So you could have done the fondant in red, like as in red fondant, already colored, pre-colored. Um, I used to do that years ago, but I don't do that anymore because it really doesn't give me nice shades. And if you're going to look at a kennel in real life, it's not usually one plain, bland, flat color. So I will typically hand paint anything I've got. Um, and or I'll airbrush it. So with this one, you could have done it a couple ways. You could have painted it and then put your molds on after if you wanted to do that. And the only reason I've done it this way is because if you've painted it and you're going to put your molds on, you still got to dampen the back of the mold so it sticks. And on occasion, it can make the red paint run. So um, look, I've done it this way, but hey, there's not really any right or wrong. So if you prefer to paint it first and put your trims on later, then by all means do that. So I've just used a straight red, and this is a Wilton color that I've used on this one, and I've merely just gone over and over and over it until I've got the shade that I'm wanting. But like I said, you can pre-color it or you can airbrush it or whatever. Oh, sorry about my hair. Seems like I've got my hair hanging in the in the frame. Yeah. Um, so we're just about to put our boards on for the roof. And the reason I'm putting these strips here is merely just to infill the gap between where the board is going to actually sit and the cake itself. So it doesn't need to be perfect. The front edges do probably need to be pretty straight, but the back edges, it really doesn't make any difference because no one's going to see that anyway. So the cardboard I actually pre-cut. I measured the size of the roof that I wanted, and I pre-cut it just um, using a serrated knife. And you'll see in a minute. So there's no right or wrong way here doing the roof. Um, I use a cardboard because it's just easier to get things straight, and it's easier to do your trims later on. But if you wanted, you could simply just ice your fondant straight over the top of this because it's pretty straight and square as it is anyway. Um, and there's also no right or wrong way as to how to put the board down. I've put it shiny side down. Um, Typically, because if you're actually going to use this for a cake, normally the cake would go on the shiny side, but yeah, like I said, there's no real right or wrong, and you certainly could have put a fondant roof straight on here. So what I'm now going to do is put some fascia trims on, and you'll see that later on we do this fascia trim twice, and that's simply because of the way the roof line sits. So again, I've just used a little bit of water to stick it to the board. It sticks really, really well, but you can use some egg white or you can use some cake glue or whatever you've got handy. That's no problem at all. So we're just using the same trim cutter that I used earlier. And I've just laid the fondant strip over it and bent it so it gives you a beautiful smooth finish across the front. So I just bent it over the side of the board. The thing about this is, oh, and also you can see that I've put the trim around the door. It's virtually the same process as everything else that we've done. So I've basically just used my cutter, and just cut a strip of fondant to the width that I wanted. A little bit of water around the door, not too much. If you want to, like I said, if you want to use some cake decorating glue, that's cool, whatever works for you. And have just laid it around. But I started putting the trim on at the top. So I started at the top of the door. So when the sides fall, they fall naturally flat rather than doing it the other way around, starting from the bottom up. Again, a little bit of water, and I have a plastic um, mold that's got lines in it. It's really, really tricky to actually um, find something that has a really nice roof imprint. So I've simply found a really nice basic lines for the roof, and I think that that's probably fine. A cobblestone roof or something, or a slate roof would have been nice, but um, doing something like that, because there's no real imprints available, it's either hand cutting them or but hand cutting all your little roof tiles and stuff like that, and I really just couldn't be bothered. So this line imprint looks quite nice, and it gives the impression of roof tiles. um, You can see here already that I've also put the trim on the top of the roof. So again, it's exactly the same process as everything else. So just cut your fondant to the width that you want, lay it across the top, and just bend it over so it joins. So you've got a nice ridge that sits across the top of the cake. This is just a slate grey, and I'm really just putting it on with a little bit of alcohol, a clear vodka. Now, paper towel is really, really cool because it actually has um, this particular paper towel has a really nice imprint in it. So when you pull it off, it just takes off any excess paint, and it sort of left a really interesting imprint in the roof, which made it look a little bit more realistic. What you can't actually see here at the moment is I did actually put another fascia um, strip of icing in front or at the top, so you'll see when we turn it around, so across the gable. I've just used exactly the same grey here that I've used for the roof, and just pressing it in so it actually gets into the indentation, because what we actually want to do is take the surface of it off. So just make sure you got your paint in and it's filling in um, all those nice patterns and gaps and holes in your fondant, and then just wipe off the surface, and it'll give you a really, really cool cobblestone look. So you can see here on the gable, I've got a couple of extra little trims there. So this is a really fun part, putting it all together. It's my very, very favourite part of making the cake. I pre-made this. It's just fondant, um, and I've just hand painted the picture to the front of it. So, um, and just use a little bit of melted chocolate. This is my little dog. Like I said, you can buy a dog, or if you're comfortable, you can have a go at making your own. I haven't included it in this tutorial because the dog took me about 4 hours to do. But I will look at doing a modelling chocolate tutorial at a later stage. Um, As this is only for this tutorial, I haven't stuck anything down, and the reason that I haven't done that is so I can take all the pieces off later and keep them if I ever decide I want to use them later on. But if this cake was actually to go somewhere, you would use a little bit of chocolate to stick all these pieces onto the board. So I put all this together, and then I sort of decided, well, I really wanted a ladder. So um, so so what I've done is I've just taken two skewers and I've coated the skewers in modeling chocolate and rolled them. Um, and I've just used some small strips of modeling chocolate for the rungs. But what I decided is when I put it all up, I thought, oh, this is pretty cool. And then I decided I didn't like the color it was in and I wanted it black. So I actually took it all off, painted it black, and you'll see in a minute I put it back on. The little dog bowl on the side is also just hand painted modeling chocolate. Just touching it up. And I also put a hose on. And we're just about finished. I hope everyone has enjoyed themselves. Thank you for following along.